Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So hello everyone, welcome to Dharma Bum Basics. My name is Travis, I facilitate this group. So tonight's topic, I actually did a talk on this 2 weeks ago, but we had some internet connection difficulties. So it looked a bit like The Exorcist. So hopefully tonight there's no Wi-Fi issues. It shows I have a strong signal. Doesn't seem like it's scattering out. So tonight's topic is heedfulness, honesty, and shame. And we may talk about just one. We may talk about all three. We'll see where it goes. We'll get started with the meditation in just a minute here. I was listening to a talk earlier today from my teacher, and in it he mentioned something that his teacher had said before. So I wanted to share that it's a short bit before we started our meditation. I don't typically go into the kind of disclaimer that I probably honestly should before meditation of your mind's going to wander, you're going to get lost in thought. It's not going to be mystical and magical and that whole thing. So I want to read this little bit because in terms of emptying the mind, this is one of the most simple yet profound things that I've read or heard about that as an example. So I wanted to share that. So one time Ajahn Fuang was visiting one of his disciples' houses, one of his supporters' houses. Ajahn Fuang was a monk in Thailand. So he was visiting their house, and the supporter's sister, who was studying under a different meditation teacher, asked him. Normally, you would do chanting before a meal, but Ajahn Fuang said, "Let's do a Dharma discussion before the meal." So she asked him, meditation is all about making your mind empty, right? And then Ajahn Fuang responded, "No. If you make your mind empty, it's like leaving the door to your house open. Anybody can walk in. Any thought, any idea can just walk right in. You've got to give the mind some work to do. Keep the door closed and focus on cleaning up your house before you let other people in." Meaning other thoughts and ideas and things like that. But I thought that was a beautiful image there. Making the mind empty is like leaving the door to your house open. And then any thought, any idea can just come right on in and make itself at home, set up camp there. And then it can drive your home to ruin. You can make a mess of it. So what we're doing with this meditation practice instead is housekeeping. We're keeping our door shut, meaning we're keeping the mind occupied with a task. That task, in tonight's example, would be maintaining awareness of the breath. And that activity is playing with the breath, approaching it from different angles, holding different perceptions to see what really works to get the mind to settle down. Not to empty out, not to blank out, but to be calm and aware of what's happening in the body, in the mind, in this moment. So hopefully that's what we'll do. course, as I mentioned prior, your mind will wander. You have this thought and that thought. You might think about if it's possible to ride tigers like horses, or any other crazy thing. That shows you where my mind's at. So the mind will wander, but we'll just want to bring it back 10 times, 100 times, just keep bringing it back. It's no big deal if it slips away, and it's not a defeat. When you notice that the mind has wandered off, that's actually cause for celebration, because you've noticed. You could just sit here, close your eyes, and then open them again in 20 minutes when the bell wakes you up. But when you have these moments throughout the sit, where you're noticing that you're off on some bizarre thing, you're off taming tigers or whatever else it may be, and you can recognize that as a victory, not a defeat, because you've noticed that it's happened. And it's actually a moment of mindfulness. It's a moment of alertness when you notice that the mind has wandered. And then it's a moment of mindfulness that you remind yourself what you're supposed to be doing here. And you gently bring the mind back to the object of meditation, this breath and this evaluation. So we'll get started. Throughout the meditation, I may or may not say some things like breathing in through the eyes and the ears, or breathing in through the surface of the skin. From a physiological standpoint, we are breathing in through the surface of the skin, so it's not necessarily totally imaginative. We're using imagination, we're using visualization, not to check out, but to check in with what's happening in the body. And it's easier to spread our awareness throughout the body if we have the breath as an anchor. If we just try to spread our awareness throughout the body without any kind of anchor, we'll dissolve out from the body and be off somewhere else. But if we have this anchor of the breath, it focuses the mind. So that's why we'll try to work breath throughout the entire body, so that anchor is with us no matter where we are at in the body. The best way to go about that is to visualize that the breath can go anywhere in the body. And as I mentioned, physiologically, it can. We're breathing in through the surface of the pores. Oxygen, breath comes in through the lungs, gets processed in the blood, animates the nerves. So the whole body is involved in the breathing process. So all we're doing is tuning in to the possibility, or to the belief that it's possible to experience the breath with the entire body. And the interesting thing with meditation is any perception that you apply as being possible changes the experience of the meditation. Your perceptions can change your sensations. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll get right to it. Taking 3 deep breaths slowly. noticing if this deep breathing feels good. And if it does, you can keep on breathing in this way. If it doesn't, feel free to switch things up. Maybe even deeper still or more shallow. Heavier or lighter. In short, out long, or in long and out short. Just approaching it as play. A game to see what settles the mind the best in this moment. What feels best for the body in this moment. When you found a rhythm and texture of breath that does feel good, the next step is to just maintain it. Maintain it for as long as it feels pleasant. And if it stops feeling pleasant, switch it up again. But develop that skill of maintaining a pleasant breath. If you have an itch or an ache, you can just see if you can send that pleasant breath, that sensation, to this itch or this ache. See if you can dissolve it away. Recognize that the mind has wandered, lost in thoughts of the past, worries about the future, whatever it may be. Let it go. Not gripping onto it, but also not pushing it away. Simply letting go of it. So you can release that distraction. And you can relax any tension that gave rise to that distraction, perhaps in the forehead or the shoulders, allowing them to soften. And keeping them relaxed as you maintain this calming breath, this centering rhythm of breath. As you maintain this breath, you can question what kind of perception you're currently holding of the breath. Are you still holding the perception that the breath is just what comes in and out of the lungs? What would happen if just for the moment you perceive the breath as the flow of energy and awareness throughout the entire body? Notice if holding that perception changes sensation. As we sat here collecting our awareness around the breath, if we call to mind the earlier imagery of housekeeping, this is much like gathering our cleaning supplies. And establishing our intent to clean. Now that we've gathered our supplies, we can then look through our home, this body, to survey this body from the crown of the head on down to the tips of the toes. Noticing if there's any areas with cobwebs, meaning areas of the body that are starved for breath and awareness. And allow this breath awareness to flow into those parts of the body. Or if there's any corners of our house that are cluttered, meaning any parts of the body that are tense or it feels like there's restriction or constriction, we can use the breath to gradually declutter, relaxing tension bit by bit with each breath, gently flowing through the blockage. And as we've done this base level of cleaning throughout our home, throughout this body, spreading breath and awareness throughout it, nourishing starved areas, soothing restricted areas. We can then begin to go through and organize our drawers, our cabinets, meaning the thoughts and intentions and perceptions we're sitting with in this moment, that we're carrying with us at this time. To use the breath as our watchtower, can we switch from watching the body to watching the mind? And is it possible to identify if a thought, an idea, or a perception that comes across is skillful? Meaning, does it help to center the mind and calm the mind? Does it promote clear seeing? Or is it unskillful? Meaning it clouds the mind, enrages the mind, prevents any sense of calm. Is it possible to just notice these, skillful and unskillful? And is it possible, upon noticing these unskillful qualities, noticing that maybe at one point in time they were useful to us, but not anymore, not for this practice? Can we just relax around those? Relax around those perceptions and those ideas, and allow them to dissolve away. All they're doing now is cluttering the drawers or cluttering our mind. So we can let those go and focus on these skillful qualities of mind. This compassion, this wise reflection, this goodwill. Maybe they're a little dusty, we haven't used them in a while. Maybe they need some cultivation, some development. But that's okay. That's why we're here. and with our house clean and our cabinets somewhat organized, the body settled from tension, and the mind becoming a bit clearer, you can slowly begin to open the eyes. Never in a rush. Stretching if needed. So as always, I'm curious what anyone's experience of that meditation was like. I know I have a tendency to lead some unorthodox meditations, but that might be especially so. It's always good, as I mentioned, to have a sense of ingenuity with the practice, a sense of creativity. As long as we understand that that ingenuity and that creativity is intended to drive us further into noticing what's happening presently in the body and in the mind. That creativity isn't necessarily imagining flowing down a river where everything's okay or being completely dissociated from the body. But in fact, it's using these visualizations, using this imagery and this creativity, this ingenuity to tap into the body and into the mind. I always like to think of them as the intention behind them is more of an anchor rather than an additional distraction. It can be really interesting and really beneficial to notice, especially when we're doing a kind of a mind-centered meditation, which I don't normally do. Normally we stay pretty much in the body, or we cultivate a quality in the heart. Only because typically with any kind of mindfulness of mind or mental qualities or anything like that, it can be important to do a fairly long body scanning, sensation scanning, and relaxing first to get the mind steady enough, to get our awareness steady enough to look at the mind itself. Because if we try to look at the mind while we're still scattered, then the mind's scattered. It's hard to look at. So I don't typically do that where we go into watching the thoughts, simply because, in my opinion, that's more of like a 45-minute meditation rather than a 25-minute meditation. So one interesting thing with this style of meditation when we're looking at the mind, which ultimately in our practice we should be working up to, it's part of insight, it's very important. But it's interesting to notice how easily the mind is conditioned and influenced by outside things. if you're all here in person, I would say show of hands who thought about a tiger while they were meditating. Or who started thinking of their favorite horror movie, since I mentioned The Exorcist in the beginning. And it's interesting to notice how susceptible our mind is to external stimuli. And those are rather benign examples, but it goes to show that as we're going through our day, as we're living throughout our day, we expose ourselves to all sorts of dangers in terms of the mind, in terms of dangerous influences on the mind. We don't like to look at it that way. We don't like to think about it that way. But the mind is so susceptible. The untrained mind will take on pretty much anything. It'll take on a lot of things that we don't even necessarily agree with, viewpoints we don't necessarily agree with, but it will adopt them to some extent. And then it's only through this practice and through looking at the mind that we begin to notice, oh wow, all those years ago I took that as a working hypothesis and I didn't even notice it. And it's been to either a blatant or a subtle extent influencing how I think. That's why I'm always calling to question what kind of perceptions we're holding of the breath, what kind of perceptions we hold about our awareness, because a lot of those perceptions can be unskillful. And if we can shift that perception to a skillful perception, it makes all the difference in the experience of the meditation and the rest of the practice throughout our lives. So, and feel free to type if you thought about tigers or horror movies. Feel free to put that in there. Cookies were also mentioned in the chat, so I'm sure anyone who saw the chat probably thought of cookies at least once. And it's like that old kind of joke or thought experiment of don't think of a pink elephant, and then of course you think of a pink elephant. It's basically that expanded upon. Just noticing how susceptible we are. And that kind of brings me into the topic of heedfulness. So heedfulness, the Buddha described heedfulness as the root of all skillful qualities. So all skillful qualities develop from this heedfulness. And heedfulness, very simply put, is acknowledging the law of karma, that our actions do have consequences, not only on the world outside, but on the world inside. What we think, what we say, and what we do impacts both the world around us and our own mind. So, this quality of heedfulness is noticing, one, how susceptible we really can be to outside influence. And then doing something that's typically referred to as guarding the sense doors, meaning abstaining from influences, abstaining from associating with people that we know that cause us to behave unskillfully or think unskillfully until we're really strong in our practice. And then we can go back and try to change that. No, won't happen. But we can at least be uninfluenced or less influenced by unskillful qualities. So this heedfulness is noticing the danger, and of the danger it's a fear based on the danger that comes from our own unskillful actions, the consequences of our own unskillful actions. So one of the hindrances that I'll often talk about, and I won't get into all of them, but one of them is restlessness and worry. And some people will hear this heedfulness of, heedfulness is kind of a fear-based, but it's more of being cautious rather than paranoid. And that's the real distinction there. It's acknowledging that there are dangers out in the world and there are dangers in the mind. And the more pressing dangers are the dangers in the mind, because they'll lead to us experiencing dangers in the world or being a source of danger for others. So this quality of really looking at the mind, and this gets into our second topic of truthfulness, really looking at the mind and not shying away from it. Being very real with ourselves where we currently are, what we currently believe. Being real with if what we believe is based on any sense of logic or it's just something we adopted because it's something someone told us when we were 6. And it's noticing these things and being very real with ourselves where we stand. Because if we look at the mind with this inherent bias of our own view of ourselves, our own opinion of ourselves, for example, we like to think, well, I'm a good person. So then when you hold strongly to that conviction of I'm a good person, it creates a bias in the mind. And then anything in the mind that contradicts that or puts that view in danger is swept under the rug. The awareness kind of naturally doesn't notice it because we're working with an assumption already. We have a certain assumption in mind. And because of that, we have bias in our analysis of our own mind. If we think, oh, I'm a bad person, we won't notice the good qualities of our mind. My teacher always says, if you define yourself, you limit yourself. So when we do away, at least for the time being in the meditation, we do away with a sense of I'm a good person or I'm a bad person or I'm this kind of person or that kind of person. If we can just set aside greed and distress with reference to the world, with reference to what kind of person I am, it makes it a lot easier. The Buddha never asked the question of who am I? He asked the question of what am I currently doing? So instead of focusing on what kind of person we are, we focus on what the content of our current thoughts and actions are. And it's by having this raw truthfulness, this raw honesty with ourselves that we can begin to grow. And we can begin to grow out of those uncomfortable parts of ourselves that we don't like to look at. But if we don't look at them, they'll always be there. And in a lot of cases, they'll only grow stronger. But if we can look at them, we can learn how they've come into being. We can learn how we're feeding them. And we can stop feeding them. And we can turn our attention instead to feeding those skillful qualities of mind. So, yeah. And then this third quality, well, the other thing I'll say about truthfulness, because I picked these 3 qualities. I'm remembering just now why I picked these 3 together. So there's something that can often be misunderstood as to what they mean from a Buddhist context, right? Heedfulness could be misconstrued as like paranoia or obsessive worrying or anything like that. But it's based more on being heedful, being cautious of what qualities we're developing in this moment, not based on, oh my God, what if a meteor hits? That's not heedfulness, that's just paranoia. So heedfulness is being very real with the dangers that we have some influence over. The ones that we can abstain from, the ones that we can overcome and develop skillful qualities in their place. With truthfulness, people will sometimes hear truthfulness or like the precept being training rules for practice, one of the most important ones, which is no lying. Now, no lying doesn't mean that you just go around speaking your mind constantly, even if it's going to cause a great deal of pain to people. That's not kind of the truthfulness that the Buddha is talking about. We'll often hear, is it true? Is it necessary? Is this the right time and place? Oftentimes, the truths that we have aren't necessary to tell someone. There's nothing Buddhist about just going up to someone and telling them that, I don't like you. I don't like you at all. Your face bothers me, or whatever it may be. Maybe that's honest from your perception, but it's not this quality of truthfulness that the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about a quality of truthfulness, being real with ourselves, and simply not lying. It doesn't mean constantly blabbering off your opinions, but it means not misrepresenting your opinions. And then the final one on here was shame. Now, most likely, unless you've dove into the texts a bit, most likely when you saw shame in the title, you assumed, most likely, not putting thoughts into anyone's head except about tigers and cookies, most likely when you saw shame in the title, you thought, oh, he's going to talk about being totally free from shame or not having any sense of shame. But within Buddhist practice, there's actually a place for shame, but a place for a skillful sense of shame, meaning a sense of shame that actually leads the mind to freedom. So here, it's not shame as in the opposite of pride, it's shame as in the opposite of shameless. So it's establishing that I have this practice now. Certain actions that I used to do that I know are unskillful, I'll consider them beneath me. And it's not extending this shame to like other people, like, oh, you're lesser because you do. It's focusing on yourself, perceiving things that you know are unskillful that you used to really enjoy, or potentially used to really enjoy, seeing it as, I'm trying to be better than that now. I'm trying to be more than that now. That is beneath me. So you'll often see shame quoted in texts, and I just I don't have a lot to say on it, but I just wanted to point out that the shame that they're talking about is that sense of having a healthy sense of self-worth, not what we typically think of when we hear the word shame. So, the last thing that I'd like to say about anxiety versus heedfulness, anxiety just worries all the time, worries constantly, contemplates worst case scenarios, all that kind of stuff. Heedfulness says, okay, whatever happens in my life, I know that when it happens, I would benefit from having a deeper mindfulness, stronger alertness, stronger concentration, stronger discernment. Whatever ends up happening, whatever it may be that's completely out of my control, what I do have control of isn't the scenario, but the qualities that I can bring to those scenarios. So this heedfulness is acknowledging our part in it and acknowledging that whatever scenario may come, if we develop these skillful, these wholesome qualities of mind, we'll be more well equipped regardless of what the specific scenario is. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions on any of that? I know it was a lot, but curious. Yes, I love that. So Marisa shared that at one point Josh shared with her that shame is useful and that it shows you that you have a working moral compass and points to things that you'd like to change to better yourself. Absolutely. Yes. A healthy sense of shame is definitely inherent in any kind of moral system. There's actually a quote in the canon, I believe it's, there is no evil that one will not do who has done this. What is it? Feeling no shame when telling a deliberate lie. there is no evil that one would not commit, having had no shame for telling a deliberate lie. Oftentimes the Buddha talked about truthfulness as being the most primary of virtues, the most important of virtues. In the Jataka tales, which are like stories of the Buddha's past lives, he broke pretty much all of the precepts at one point or another in these past life stories. But the one that he never broke was telling a lie. He was never untruthful. Sometimes he would be very clever in the way that he phrased things, but he never deliberately lied. And that's supposed to emphasize the importance of truthfulness according to the Buddha. So in that sense, feeling no shame towards telling deliberate lies when truthfulness is the primary of all virtues means that there is no evil that it would be too difficult for that person to do if they're comfortable with lying about it. That's maybe an intense statement, but it's something to ponder. Any other questions? Either on the topic tonight or anything Buddhist in general? So Eric asked, couldn't clever phrasing to sugarcoat a truth or whatever the case be considered deceitful? Deceitful. So sure, it could be considered deceitful, but it's not a lie. Right, this is a trickier area to touch on. I myself am very careful not to deliberately tell a lie, deliberately state something that is factually untruthful, or at least factually untruthful as far as I'm aware. I don't have all the facts, I'm not omniscient, so most likely it's not factually true. But anyway, I'm very careful myself with this understanding of this importance of truthfulness to not intentionally state something that is false. That being said, there are certain skills required as a human being to function in the world. So I am very careful with my phrasing when I state things. If I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or I haven't, or if it's something that could come off as very critical and my opinion or my advice hasn't been asked for, I'm very careful with my phrasing. That's something in more recent years that I'm trying to be better about, not giving my unsolicited opinion or my unsolicited criticisms, even if I think it may be useful. Because oftentimes when it's unsolicited, it's almost never useful because the walls immediately go up. So it's a matter of your individual discretion But could it be seen as deceitful? Absolutely. People can see all sorts of things as all sorts of different things. Is it factually untrue or factually dishonest? No. So that's the way that I look at it. Ask 100 different people, they'll tell you 100 different things about that precept. But that's kind of my understanding of it. So I think we'll close on that. I may eventually, if I can find some good ones about truthfulness and whatnot, I may eventually link them in the description. Not sure, we'll see. And yeah, so the only other thing that I wanted to mention before we head out is starting this Monday night at 7, the afternoon video Dharma that we have on Tuesdays at noon will be moving to Monday night and will be evening video Dharma. So, and that will still be led by Natalie. That will be on Zoom. The information's already posted on the website. Monday nights at 7 p.m. It'll start with the guided meditation and then go into watching a pre-recorded video from some Dharma teacher, any Dharma teacher, and then a 20-minute discussion about the context of the video or content of the video. So that'll be happening. And then, there is one more question. Marisa asked, is the skillfulness/unskillfulness based on the intent behind the sugarcoating? Yes. So we'll go a little bit over, and don't feel like you have to stick around if you don't want to. We all got things to do. Got to get back to cat videos and putting off cleaning the house. But so the intent with lying is the intent to deliberately misrepresent the truth. That's the intent behind lying. The intent behind harmful speech is to cause harm. The intent behind divisive speech is to cause divisions. So it's the intent behind, and I wouldn't necessarily even call it a sugarcoating, but it is that intention behind the sidestepping. Let's call it sidestepping. So yes, that's pretty much it. So we will close with a transfer of merit. If comfortable, please join palms. Oh, and also Ajahn Jeff or Thanissaro Bhikkhu is coming June 25th. And that's a Thursday. That'll be in place of this class. That will be held on Zoom and most likely streamed to YouTube if we can figure that out. So we'll close with a transfer of merit. May all beings in all directions, without limit or end, be healthy, joyful, and at ease. May we all be healthy, joyful, and at ease. Metta karuna mudita upekha sahanga taya cetasa chaturisam bharatva bharati samaudarupavena savanammarupavena savasangharupavena sote hantu nirantaram